Hey, welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you are a real worship leader with a real question and you want a real answer, head right here and submit your question for a future episode. Got some good questions this week? Let's talk about it. What are some practical tips to avoid comparing your current worship ministry situation with a ministry or band you previously worked with? I'm finding myself missing previous places where I served, longing to have in my own ministry the quality, aka the budget and training, but don't want to come across as negatively comparative. Yeah, that's a good question. I've led at, I would say maybe, if I put it all together, maybe 5 different worship ministries in my life at the church that I grew up in, on my college worship ministry, the other church that I served in, the worship ministry at the Christian school that I worked at, and then my current worship ministry. So I've been in 5 different worship ministries. And the one that I'm currently in, I'm trying, I don't think I've ever really compared it to those past ones, at least not recently. I'm just trying to think, what would I compare it to? Because I don't think it's just that you're comparing it, right? It's that you're, longing for that old way. You want that old way of doing things, and specifically, if I'm reading between the lines, it sounds like you used to have nicer gear. You said I had a better budget and better training, so probably more skilled volunteers or something. And I think the biggest antidote for your comparison is to just love the people of your church. God has called you to serve where you're at right now, with the resources that you have right now, with the team members that you have right now at their current skill level where they're at right now. Love the people of your current church and just think, how can I best serve them where I'm at right now? And I don't think it's unhealthy to look back and use all of that experience that you have from your previous ministry or ministries, and you're like, we used to do this, and we used to do this, and we used to do this, and that worked really well, especially in that church. You also have to understand that maybe every church is a little bit different, so the things that worked in your last church aren't necessarily going to work in this new church. But look at, this is what we did in our old church, and it worked well, and we're not there yet in my new church, but maybe I think that's going to help this new church to, if we could get to that point, that would be amazing. And so just don't completely dismiss everything in the past, but use it as a learning opportunity, but also make sure that you are sifting that old way of doing things through the context of your new church. Because I guarantee some of those old things, even if you had them right now, they wouldn't be it's not oh, this is going to be amazing all of a sudden. So I would start with just by loving my people and thinking, how can I serve them? That's our goal, no matter where we're at. Think, how can I serve the people of my church where they're at right now? What do they need? And then if we're being honest with ourselves, why do we compare in our mind like this? And I've done this probably too in the past, so I'm not knocking you for it. I'm just let's be honest with ourselves. Why do we feel this way? It's because things are difficult right now. You're like, man, it was so easy when I just had a guitarist who knew what they were doing. It was so easy when I had that group of people who I'd been playing with for 8 years, and we could just basically show up on Sunday morning and read each other's minds. And now I don't have that stuff. And now I need to actually lead my team well. Just reflecting for a second, back on my last worship team that I served with, it was basically a group of people that I grew up going to church with and playing music together all the time. My brother was on the worship team. And it was we had this relationship and this bond where we could essentially read each other's mind. Everybody on the worship team, we knew exactly what we were going to do. And because of that, probably my leadership was a little more lax than if I had a completely new worship team of people who didn't know each other. And so when I started at this church and I didn't have those relationships, it caused me to be a better worship team leader because I couldn't rely on that old bonded relationship. And I had to actually treat my worship team members like worship team members and not just hey, we're just going to show up and we already all know what we're doing because we've been playing together for 10 years. So view this as a time to grow in your worship team leadership where you don't have all of that stuff to fall back on. Because I think a lot of the times that's what happens. It feels like things are harder right now. And I feel this like when somebody new joins our worship team. I've had it happen a couple times. It's like, man, it was so much easier when like we just had people on our worship team who've been on our worship team for a while, but now somebody's new and rehearsals are a little bit slower and we've got to teach them the parts and we've got to get them additional resources and stuff that the people who have been on the team for a while, they don't need. But that caused me to have to be a better leader because I had to accommodate those things. So just use this as a time to improve in your worship leading, love your church more, and I guess recognize that gear isn't the end-all be-all. Maybe you had in-ears or something at your old church and now you don't have those. Like, let's get back to the simplicity of leading worship, at least in our mind. Not that we can't have all of those fancy things, not that they don't help. But like at the end of the day, all you need to lead worship is honestly just your voice. But, you know, you could do it with an acoustic guitar and a very simple sound system. So maybe use this time to get back to the foundation of what it means to be a worship leader and focus on those things. See it as a season of just forgetting about gear. Gear would be fun if we had a bigger budget, but we don't need it. So let me focus on the foundational aspects of leading worship. I've been a vocalist member of worship teams for over 25 years. Our current team is good musically, but we seem to just go from Sunday to Sunday with no real attempt to improve how we lead. I've given them your information so they can think about some of the ideas you bring up, but I don't believe they've looked you up. Do you have any suggestions of how to instill the desire to be more creative in leading worship? I always feel weird when people are like, I told my worship team to look you up. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like, I'm just like this random worship leader from Pennsylvania. Like, why would you listen to me? I guess I'm trying to read between the lines here. You say like, how do you instill the desire to be more creative in leading worship? I don't know if creative's the right word that you're looking for there. I assume it's not. I think what you mean is like it seems like people have gotten into this rut of we just have been doing this for a while. We pretty much know what we're doing at this point, and so there's really no reason to improve. We're comfortable with where we're at, but you're like 25 years into this, and you're like, I still want to get better every single time. That's kind of the vibe that I'm getting, so I hope I'm reading that correctly. And if that's the case and they're just like stuck in like, this is how we've always been doing things, and they're probably, you aren't even saying like, hey, they're not good musicians or anything. You're just like, I would just want them to improve. And just reflecting on my own worship leading, and I actually made a video about this not too long ago. I titled the video something like how to improve your worship leading by 52% this year. I'll link that down in the description below because it'll apply to what you asked about. But essentially it was about like when you feel stuck in your worship leading and you don't feel like you're improving, what are some things that you can do? And I think if we want to improve in our worship leading and we feel stuck, a lot of times it is an information issue where we're just like, I don't have a vision for how I could improve. I've like reached the cap. Like I'm playing all the songs well. I don't know, I have all the elements of worship that I want in our worship service. I've got, scripture reading, prayer, so on and so forth. And it feels good, and I play my songs well, and I sing well, and I don't, if I was honest and I wanted to improve, I don't even know how I would improve, so I'm not even thinking about improving. So I say that because I think it's an information issue where we need to constantly be expanding our understanding of what it means to lead worship well. And one of the best ways to do that is to go through like either a devotional with your worship team or just read a worship leading book with your worship team. That's always fired up my worship teams when I do things like that. So I will leave a link to my worship team devotional store down below, and you can check out all the devotionals that I have. But also I recommend just like reading a book about worship leading. I'll leave some suggestions for that down in the description below as well. But just to be able to have that conversation from hearing from someone else about things that you never even thought of, I think is what expands our understanding of how to lead worship. To actually, like, oftentimes we're like stuck in our own worship ministry, and if we're not seeking training from anyone else, then we just keep doing the same things over and over again, and we never grow because we're not hearing any information other than the information that we already have, and we're like, oh, this is good, so we reach our cap. But once you learn new information, then your cap for what it means to lead well goes up to here, and then you have to rise up to here. And then what it means to lead well goes up again, and so on and so forth. And so I really think it's about hearing outside voices from your worship ministry. At the very least, if they're not like just teaching you things about what it means to lead worship, then they're at least stimulating conversation in your worship team, which leads to understandings of how we can do what we're supposed to be doing better. So that would be my recommendation. I'm not sure, I don't know if you said you were the leader. You just said I'm a vocalist member of the worship team. I would maybe try to find a good worship team devotional or a book or something for your worship team and try to talk your worship team leader into having your team go through that. And maybe part of the problem is that you just show up to worship rehearsal and you just run through songs and go home. If you need a plan for your worship rehearsal that actually allows you to improve in your musicianship and in your worship leading, then check out the worship rehearsal blueprint. I'll link that down below as well. That is a free PDF where I give you 5 pieces to the perfect worship rehearsal. Those 5 pieces will allow your team to be led well musically so that they're prepared to lead on Sunday, but also spiritually so that they grow closer to God, and relationally so that they grow closer to each other. But they'll also be able to develop their worship leading skills if you actually have a plan for developing those worship leading skills. So check that out down in the description below. Other than that, until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.